Welcome to a news update with Paddle and Portage. This is M. Baxley. I'm sitting with Joe Fredericks. You know him as sort of the editor-in-chief of Paddle and Portage, and I know him, as many of you do, as a wild-eyed, persistent journalist, pursuing answers, asking critical questions about things related to our local wilderness, the Boundary Waters, Canoe area, and abroad wilderness areas. Right now, Joe Fredericks, we're here to talk about and maybe make some sense of the numerous updates that you've been trying to gather around the impacts of the Trump administration's changes, rapid changes around governance in federal agencies, specifically the United States Forest Service. You summarize some of the reporting you've been doing on paddleandportage.com and give us a sense of what we know right now.
Sure. An email goes out to lots of federal employees, basically all of them. And that was in late January. It's called...
Not the military.
Not the military, but a lot of federal employees. And for our purposes, and when we're talking about Paddle and Portage, we're talking about the Forest Service. So just we can dial that in, but it's much broader than that. But for our purposes, we're talking about the Forest Service. So this email goes out, and it's called Fork in the Road. It's the subject line or the theme, the title of it.
Ominous.
Fork in the Road.
Some would say. I'd say ominous.
And so it essentially says, paraphrasing, summarizing here, that you are being given an option to accept a buyout, a furlough. So if you accept what we're proposing to you, and you have until February 6th, Thursday, to make this decision, that you can be paid for whatever your salary or hourly wage is through the end of September. You don't even have to come to work. But after that, you're no longer an employee of the federal government. It's a downsizing of the government. So they're presenting an option to be bought out, basically. And as that email came in, I heard from somebody who works on Superior National Forest for the Forest Service, said, this email just came in, and I started doing some fact checking, looking around. Some entities were publishing articles about it, but there was so much stuff happening with executive orders and other things, like the funding freeze had happened around that time. That's now been walked back largely, but like that, all that news was happening like within 48 hours of each other.
It was chaos and potentially intentional chaos.
Potentially. Nonetheless, these Forest Service people, it was all of a sudden like, what's up with this? But it was almost so abstract, and talking with now a couple different people who've received these emails or have seen them, who are federal employees, that first one almost seemed fake, or people were like, is this some kind of spam bot bogus thing? Set it aside. But like so unbelievable that it was hard to even recognize it as authentic government communication. Exactly.
Was the response people had.
Mm-hmm. So that's the middle of the week, late January, right around like go live day on the 29th. Jump forward a couple days, 31st, Friday late afternoon. Another email comes in, and this one's signed by the chief officer for the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, which is like the mothership or above the Forest Service. It's like this umbrella of what's under the USDA, and the Forest Service is one of them. So the person who had been appointed in January as the new chief of staff or chief officer for the USDA has signed this other letter now. It's like a much more official looking document that says some version of the same thing, and also like if you are a probationary period or on a probationary status, which means you're new or you transferred into a new job, or for whatever reason you're in this probationary status, like we need to know you might be subject to some consequence for that, or it's very vague. It doesn't say exactly what it means, but it was alluding to if you're on probationary status, this might not go well for you if you don't accept this buyout. In other words, it seemed like it had a tone of sort of doubling down. Like maybe there wasn't a big response to people accepting this buyout as it was presented, sort of dismissed, even laughed at. So the federal government kind of doubled down with a little more authority. Like, hey, if you're on probationary status, this might not go well if you don't accept the buyout. This is sort of your last chance to get this buyout. We're offering you this package. If you don't take it, you might get nothing. It doesn't say that specifically, but there's some, you can read between the lines type thing. So I get this phone call from somebody who works for the federal government on Friday. It's late in the day, and there's a lot of emotion involved. And the conversation was pretty raw. We're talking about hypothetical scenarios for the Boundary Waters. If basically the Forest Service staff is gutted, what does that look like for you and I, for the people who booked permits on Go Live Day and are planning to do their trip in the quota season this year? What's it going to be like if there's hardly any staff working here? What if everybody takes this buyout and there's like almost no staff? Well, that means there's going to be no wilderness rangers. There's going to be nobody issuing the permits at the ranger stations. There's not going to be people there for things like wildfires potentially. There's like a lot of stuff that could be impacted by this when we're talking about a reduction in staff.
Well, not wildfire response, EMS response, federal government, federal resources are heavily utilized in disaster response and emergency response. And we're talking about a dramatic shift in the resources for the Forest Service, for the wilderness, and for the sort of collateral resources that are utilized on the wilderness edge communities even.
So we've got a couple articles posted about this at paddleandportage.com. Really encourage you to check them out. You can see these letters, verify them with your own eyes about what we're talking about, and just get a little more context for the circumstances. Meanwhile, happening simultaneously, the Forest Service Public Affairs staff, the people I communicate with to line up interviews that we do, they provide answers to questions. People we've worked with for years. They're telling me when I'm sending some inquiries about these missives that are coming in, they're saying, we can't talk, you got to direct your inquiries to the Washington staff, and here's this kind of generic email to send your inquiries to. And it's like, what? We can't even communicate now with the people who I need to get information with. So in other words, the lines of communication are being cut at the same time.
I don't want to blow past this because this is one of the most important elements of this process right now. As a media company and as a journalist, there are significant future-altering changes occurring, and the folks who are being impacted and are responsible for providing us with information on these changes are being directly, forcibly silenced by the administration, being told they are not allowed to communicate with you or anyone else. And that means that we are here without an interview. We are here without an on-record comment trying to make sense of what's happening, which is a unprecedented moment in time.
And makes it challenging. Makes it very challenging. And that's our experience right now. We're talking about it through our lens as a media company trying to share information to the public. We're also talking about it through the experience of people who go paddling in the Boundary Waters and who book their permits. And that's all, by comparison to what I'm about to say, small potatoes. Because we're also talking about community members, families. When we're talking about people potentially losing their jobs, downsizing to the government, in these Forest Service offices, Gunflint, Tofty, Laurentian, Lac LaCroix, Cowichwie, the biggest one in Ely. We're talking about, 200, 250, 225, let's land on that as an approximate number of people. And then those people's families. And those, their significant others or partners, their kids are in school, partners are teachers, they're coaches at the local teams. They're involved in the communities. And so as we're sort of going on about how it's hard to get information and we're trying to share it, oh man, that's going to be a drag if we can't have a clean portage in the new latrine, pales in comparison to the impacts of these communities like Grand Marais, the Gunflint, Ely, Cook. Like, that's where this is that's the real story here, if you ask me.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with that, and I'm glad you're putting that out. And I think the challenge right now is that every part of this is really legitimate and consequential. Mm-hmm. That being the most maybe measurable and tangible right now. And we can at least say, like, this is a very real consequence. People are being asked to make an impossible decision, which is choose to quit your job with a buyout, or we're not going to tell you what's going to happen, but you may get fired. You probably will get fired. And it's sort of like it's almost like it's this psychological tactic that really feels very unfair to those individuals who are just trying to make decisions for their lives and their families, who have dedicated themselves to service of the people of the United States and the land of the United States. Like, these are hardworking people who have care deeply about their communities in this place, and they're being essentially screwed with.
That's the thing, is we don't know what's going to happen. After February 6th, if people take the buyout, we know what's happening to them. If they don't, we don't know. They don't know. They're probably having a hard time sleeping at night, I would imagine, with this weighing on them. And so that's where we're at. This is all in limbo. We're trying to present it as timely as possible, certainly, obviously, as factual as possible, but it's been challenging to the usual lines of communication, kind of breaking down a little bit, and so it's just a very challenging time.
I'll ask you a personal question about this. It is because it is so challenging, and there are those unknowns that you just referenced. I think what's hard, at least for me and the people that I communicate with in my circles, is that this unknown triggers so much uncertainty that ripples through what else could be at risk. These things that we have sort of taken for granted, like the Forest Service, you know, we love those guys and we hate those guys. I mean, that's part of the fun dynamic we get to have, is they're that federal agency that we both work with, that both protect the place we love, and they also make it hard to do all sorts of things that we want to do. But at least I don't think any of us questioned that if they were going to go away. So now if the Forest Service is going to change into a completely different agency in its operation, what does that mean for the wilderness itself? Could the wilderness also change into an unrecognizable thing? Could the approach to extraction change in a way that we thought was not possible? What's hard about this time and these unknowns in this administration is the question of how far it will go. So my question is for you, Joe Fredericks, how are you coping with that uncertainty? And how would you recommend that we approach these unknowns?
Well, for me personally, I'm communicating with people that I've talked to about government regulations, changes in government policy for over a decade now. And not always in flattering terms of the government, for the sake of that being said, who are now largely being like, yeah, if this thing's dismantled, that's a worst case scenario. Some regulation is better than no regulation. And one of those people that I've talked with is Paula Maccabee, who is the executive director of Water Legacy. It's an organization in Minnesota. She's a lawyer and just someone who I've talked to about things like Polymet, the proposed copper nickel mines near the Boundary Waters and Lake Superior, other issues related to water quality for a long, long time. I talked to Paula about some of this in a recent conversation. Let's hear part of that.
You as a lawyer, but I think the more broader term or sort of slang that people might put on you is, rabid environmentalist, Paula Maccabee. How come you're talking to Paula Maccabee? There was this guy from Talon Metals when I used to work at the radio station, and he was always flipping me shit about talking to you. He would be like, I see you talk to Paula again. Can I have some airtime? Talk about the nickel mine here at Tamarack. And, so there's this label, right, that you are this rabid environmentalist. And in this era of deregulation that we're likely entering, how are you navigating that? Just that approach, that the label of you as this rabid environmentalist?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I take that label as a rabid environmentalist as a compliment. It must mean that Water Legacy and the work we're doing and our supporters are getting under their skin, and we're making the powerful uncomfortable. And that is exactly what we're intending to do. Water Legacy was formed in 2009 because there was a lot of discussion about protecting the Boundary Waters wilderness. But really no one was asking, well, what would these mines do to our health? What would they do to destruction of wild rice that native tribes rely on? What would it do to increased mercury contamination of fish, which decreases IQ and causes all kinds of behavioral problems if children eat contaminated fish, or their moms do, and then the mercury is transferred when the mom is pregnant. So Water Legacy started this work to say that in looking at these big extraction projects, it's not about the environment, it's about justice, it's about health, and it's about what we leave for our children. Do we destroy the environment, quote unquote, in order to save ourselves? And the answer is, mining companies will do the very least they can get away with. And I'm not being critical of them. That is their job. Their job is to make profit for their shareholders. But it should be the job of us as a civic society, of government, to say, no, 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 no. You have to use the best available technology. You have to ensure, you have to have financial responsibility. So the harm that you cause is avoided, is minimized. And if you still screw up, you pay for it, not the citizens. And I don't see that as being radical. I see that as sort of the basics of what I learned in Yale Law School. You internalize the externalities. You make the people who are doing the harm pay for it. Otherwise, all the little guys pay for it, and so does the climate. So that's the work that we're doing. And I think you're right. This is a very new era, because it's an era where we run into real fear. And though it may sound paradoxical, I think the decision of the Court of Appeals today was not written to hurt the DNR or slap down their decision. It was given to say, DNR, you have the power to use environmental laws, and you don't have to go along with what every mining company wants to do that's the cheapest and the easiest, and is putting the nature and people at risk. So I see the court's job as sometimes being an ally of regulators. It's not, just because a case is decided against you doesn't mean that they're mad at you. They may be thinking, well, yes, I would like to give you the authority that the mining company doesn't want you to have to protect the people and protect the water.
Well, and I think that the connection that you're making about the courts in Minnesota is an important one, and I'll come back to that in just a second, because when I mentioned Talon Metals and they've signed this agreement with Tesla and Elon Musk and like all of that large scale, these names that we're hearing all the time in the news right now, and as we're making this transformation still, like we're talking about Elon, electric vehicles, nickel, cobalt, all these things. So that's a very obvious connection, I think, for people to sort of be like, well, that's Trump and Elon, and sort of maybe dismiss or just accept that. But when we're talking about Minnesota and the DNR, like, this is the Walz administration and a Democratic governor. I mean, he was running for vice president on the Democratic ticket. And so there might be a misconception that oh, we're in Minnesota, we've got a Democratic governor, Walz, Flanagan. They're going to be looking out for the environment. But I've been talking with some people who work for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the DNR, and there's concern within those entities that they're not like at that administrative level. They're the people doing the work, doing the sampling and the studies on things like PFAS and mercury, fish, and so forth that you're talking about. And they're really concerned about some of the findings getting either buried or just not accurately reported and so forth. And that's happening. Like in Minnesota, and that might be really hard to hear for some people or sound conspiratorial and all that kind of stuff, but like it's really happening right now here in Minnesota. And I know that you've called out some of the agencies in the past and have done some incredible investigative work about the MPCA in particular, and now with this news about the DNR. What do you think about the fact that the Walz administration and the state agencies, this isn't like a Trump deregulation Elon Musk thing. This is like Walz Flanagan thing going.
Well, I think that I used to be on the St. Paul City Council, so I have a little bit of a perspective of what it's like to be in government. If the government above you is threatening to punish you if you do something that protects the people and that protects the environment, and your job is to take care of all the people and their health and safety and economics, that constraint is going to filter down. And so what I see us, whether it's us as Water Legacy or us as community activists, our job is to find places that the Trump administration can't touch. And by suing in Minnesota state courts, when there's a good case on the law and the facts, and the agency, for whatever reason, and it could be as simple as coercion. I mean, I'm not ruling that from the top down, and the top now in the federal government is a terrifying place. So when we go to court with a case, oftentimes what we're trying to do is say, here, now we're going to show you that you have the right to push back on the mining companies. And we're going to tell whether it's, that's the primary industry I work with, but I know there are other polluters and other harmful industries. Say, we're going to support regulators, and the places where the Trump administration can't touch, that awful plutocracy around him where a few billionaires can call all the shots for the rest of us. The grassroots they can't touch, and at least right now, the Minnesota Supreme Court they can't touch, Minnesota Court of Appeals they can't touch, Minnesota state courts they can't touch. So part of our job, if we believe in making this a better community, is support the nonprofit organizations that you care about, who take care of the people or the environment, and then try and help agencies, whether it's by, in my case, it's litigation, but it may be also by activism or pressure. I mean, they don't always have all the choices, is what I've seen. I mean, in this case, the Milepost 7 case, the DNR put in their brief that they don't have any choice to consider dam failure because of a decision that was made 50 years ago by the Minnesota Supreme Court. And so part of what we're doing is give them the room to do the right thing. And if we have to tell them, if you do the wrong thing, you're going to go to court and you're going to lose.
I'm Jason with Ely Outfitting Company in downtown Ely, Minnesota. As the stories by Joe M. and the Paddle and Portage team inspire you to explore the boundary waters, let our trail-savvy crew make your trip planning simple. If you haven't tried our free online trip routing service, complete with awesome interactive maps, check out elyoutfittingcompany.com. And when you're ready, find complete outfitting services, lightweight canoe rentals, and comfy bunkhouse lodging at Ely Outfitting Company.
The decision was made in March 24, right? That's when the DNR made that announcement about that they didn't need to do an EIS.
That's right.
And then you filed the suit, and you were in court in November, like I said, and around in that time frame. And then now the decision here in February, and that's less than a year, which a lot of this stuff, in my mind, when it starts getting tied up in litigation, drags on forever. People kind of lose interest in it. But this one didn't. I mean, this is less than a year, and in my mind, that is a faster turnaround.
Well, and that's partially because this is not a trial from the beginning. This is just an appeal, and we actually filed our appeal in April. So this is a pretty fast process. And one of the things I think I want to get back to, and I think people need to realize that we had an administration before that was powerful and corrupt, and we weathered that. And the question is, what can we do over the next 4 years in terms of strengthening our grassroots activism, our civic bonds, and and supporting the people we care about, whether it's our friends, our family, our church, our synagogue, our schools, so that we can all weather the storm. In Minnesota, we like to think we're better than everyone else, but these same systemic problems and people being influenced only by the very small area of news they see and not seeing what the rest of the community is seeing, that happens here too. I mean, we may be a little bit ahead of the curve on still caring about each other, but all the winds of change, from Citizens United and emphasis on money, to corporations controlling real estate, whether it's on the North Shore and in Minneapolis rather than people, to COVID breaking down some of the places we got together and shared information with each other and learned to trust each other. Those things have influenced Minnesota too. And so when we think about it, I think it's important to make sure that we don't elect in Minnesota somebody who is callously indifferent to everyone except a few rich donors. That's really important. But I think we also have to talk about what can we do to strengthen our own civic society. And that's a bigger job, and we can't point a finger. It has to happen in our households and communities.
I got the full interview with Paula and how her and I came to talk about it, which we reference in our discussion that you just heard. It was about some huge news about tailings basin from North Shore Mining, which is in Silver Bay, just down the road from our headquarters here in Grand Marais. So I encourage you to listen to the YouTube link. We got an article posted on paddleandportage.com to hear the full conversation and sort of the news from February and this week about more on that specifically.
So how does that loop back for you to how you're orienting to all the unknowns and uncertainty?
Well, as I said, for me personally, I'm working through a lot of it by talking to people like Paula. I've also reached out to some other people like poli-sci professors, environmental education people at higher education, the University of Minnesota specifically, people who are very involved in how politics and government work and intersect with society and people, so that they're helping me to have conversations. Somebody that I recently met on the show, Almanac, who's very involved and talks about like the Trump administration, what it means, what these executive orders mean, what some of this stuff like RABCs in Canada and that suspension of the permits that's driving a lot of people really crazy right now up on Sag and over in other lakes across the border of U.S. and Canada, Minnesota, and having them help me understand it so that it's not just me who is essentially just a medium, a platform to share knowledge that I don't have, but I want to get. We can get news, we can get facts and share that, but I don't have like the reason for the decisions in that context has to come from somebody who's a lot smarter than me.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this, that there are events that we report on, there are facts that we report on, and so often they're happening separately. And we are working to reach out to those people who can help us understand the ways they're connected, how they may be connected, especially in a landscape where no one, at least in the federal government, is going to willingly explain to us the connections between these events. And so I just want to say that right now, developing an informed populace, citizenry, is one of the most important things we can do, is to share information in our sources and in our circles. So I also just want to put out to our listeners, you are informed, you are intelligent people. Share with us what you know. We want to hear that. You're all bright people in your own fields. If you got information for Paddle and Portage, send it our way.
Right. And your thoughts and your feelings, and now you're navigating all this.
Exactly.
Too. You know, I made an intention this week to get out twice to go ice fishing, because it's my favorite thing to do, basically. And it would be easy to just kind of hamstring and wait for emails and phone calls. And I'm doing that as well. But you know what? I can do it in the evening. I can do it, make some other changes, not watch the ball game, or the latest YouTube channel that I follow has a video. That video is going to be there for a while, so I can adjust accordingly to keep myself a little bit sane through this. And a big part of that for me is getting out there these gorgeous sunny days that we're having here in the winter and do some frickin' ice fishing, for crying out loud.
I couldn't just celebrate that more, Freddie. I was out skating on the 6 Mile Ice Trail on Gunflint Lake twice this last week, happened to be my birthday week, so I took a little extra time to get up there. And I was having a conversation with one of our podcast fans on social media, and who helped me remember that my personal mission is to really remind myself what matters, what's real. And even though all this stuff is real, and I want to be connected to that reality because it has impacts, real impacts, what's just as real, if not more real, is that ice, is that snow, is that sun that's beating down on my face, and the wind, and the friends that I'm with. That's all real too. And this is, I think, now more than ever important for us to stay firmly grounded in both.
Right. I think what is as detrimental as the sort of I'm just going to go ice fishing only approach and tune out, it doesn't seem very helpful to me as an individual in this society, or to my own mental health for that matter, in the same sense that it doesn't seem healthy for me to stay here in the office around the clock waiting for emails. Like, there's got to be some kind of happy middle ground, and that's what I'm striving for. I hope the podcast here is a middle ground for some of that too. We are doing some more of these news episodes, but a lot of them, if you click to the one before or the one after or two before, it's a whole other vibe. So just ride in this middle ground with us as we continue to share news and information from the Boundary Waters and certainly far beyond.
And I do want to say a really special thank you to all of our friends in the Forest Service that can't speak. Right now, I think personally, more than ever, I am grateful for the work that you do and have done. And the heart, for those of you that I know personally, for people, and the heart for the place that is the Boundary Waters, may be the most passion of anybody I know, because you live it and you work it. So thank you. Our hearts are with you, and take some strength.
And that's for the 20, 25 people down at Tofty, 30, 35 people maybe at Gunflint, maybe some 80 people over in Ely at the Ranger Station, and LaCroix, Laurentian, like everybody. Not just the ones we met through the podcast, but everybody out there who works for the Forest Service on Superior National Forest, down in Duluth at the office. We appreciate you, thinking about you during this really challenging time, and hope to see you out on the portage sometime this summer.